Oh, hi there, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about, among other things, trees. Typically, someone from the modern era, when they think of trees and forests, they think of peaceful serenity. They think of green foliage, berries, butterflies, and an overall pleasant experience. That's because the trees of today, for the most part, are relatively young. Um, Back in the day, there were a lot of forests that were many hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old, and they looked like what they were. They were quite spooky. My friend over here is a caricature of such a tree. We will call him Treebeard because it's fitting for his name. There are many depictions in folklore of trees being spooky, malevolent things. And there are many reasons why that would be. I can give you some examples, more modern examples of when trees were scary, like Lord of the Rings is an obvious one. There's a Tales from the Crypt Keeper, Sleeping Beauty, which also depicts trees in a spooky kind of light. Because as you can see from this, you got little bats coming out of them. There's all kinds of like owls and spooky things. Not to mention in forests, you get spooky animals. You get like warthogs, wild boar, bears, wolves. It's a dark, dank area, and it has a smell to it. And to wander into one of these forests is can be quite terrifying. An old spooky forest. So early man or earlier man, a few hundred years ago, when they saw these forests, obviously they were spooked out by them. And they noticed the benefits of lumber, so they just went, well, let's just chop all this lumber up and build boats with it. Which is what they needed, and it limited the spookiness of that forest. Now also, there were many barbarians who actually liked fighting from the forest. It gave them the advantage in certain senses, mostly against fighting against the Romans and things like that. That's the European side of it. But also when the early settlers came to North America, they also contended with First Nations tribes that like to fight from the forest as well. This is a little uncommon knowledge, but obviously in Canada there are times of the year when the forest is dirt dry. Like everything's dry about it. It'll set on fire just like that. And throughout history, there have been times where people who have intentionally or unintentionally started fires in these forests, which is quite easy to do. I have reason to suspect, although I can't really prove it, that in early times, when the European settlers first came here, they deliberately did that to take away certain First Nations' ability to use the forest as their means of fighting. They're kind of hiding behind the forest and killing people from there. The thing is, not all First Nations tribes fought that way. Some of them fought out in the open plains. Similarly, how they hunted bison by horseback on arrows, but not all of them. Some of them did fight within the forest. But like I said, these forests were much older, much more spooky looking. Things tend to get more spooky looking the older you get, and same thing goes for trees. I mean, they had bats and creepy crawlies and spiders and snakes and you name it, they had them in there. There is a few things about history that are rarely brought up and not many people know of them. This is all hypothesis on my part, but as far as First Nations history goes, there's a lot of blank spaces in it, and it leaves room for critiquing and for trying to understand the purpose of why certain things have been sort of blurred out from history. And some of those are military tactics. Some First Nations tribes did fight from the forest, and they had what was more or less camouflage based on the typical designs of their clothing and their ability to process them. It was well known that many early settlers, their armies composed of soldiers that wore bright red outfits or bright blue outfits. Now, when the First Nations saw them, they went, "What a bunch of idiots. We can see these guys from a mile away." But what they didn't know was when they fought and killed those parties, when they battled, this is when they weren't trading or whatever, when they were at war in particular. It was different from tribe to tribe, how they dealt with them. It was just different. But the thing is, what did happen is similar to a feint and retreat. In the sense, there were soldiers who were sacrificed. These soldiers who were dressed brightly were there to lure the armies of the First Nations, whoever they were fighting at the time. It varies from tribe to tribe, as I've said. And perhaps there were occasions where the First Nations tribe won that particular battle because these soldiers were so brightly colored and they fought in a particular way and it just wasn't to their advantage. The thing about that is, while the First Nations soldiers were occupied fighting these soldiers, an elite army would come along and take over their home base, their camp, and hold their women and children hostage. So they may have slaughtered the obvious army and come back with an arrogant sense of self-satisfaction that they defeated an army that they thought was stupid, but they came back and to their horror, their families were being held hostage. And basically after that, it's all into the meat grinder with their soldiers. They had no choice but to go into what would be a crude concentration camp type scenario. Now it's true, those elite soldiers that did that were complete bastards. They did a lot of scare tactics and terror tactics, and they sacrificed their own men. And they used the logic, well, we trained those men, they're supposed to be the best. If they didn't win the fight, that was their fault. And not only that, but during a battle, if it were just a straight up battle between an army versus an army, there'd be heavy casualties anyway. That's just the nature of battle. This way, it was a smaller army that got slaughtered, and in the end, the fight was won because it was a little bit of an underhanded trick, a bit of deception, but it was effective, and it struck terror within the First Nations tribes that they knew that they were dealing with people that if need be, would sacrifice their own men for victory. This, again, is a bit of a working hypothesis. I have heard some things through the grapevine of military tactics that are rarely spoken of. And, sometimes you have to use your imagination because you're not going to find these sources on a Wikipedia page. You're not going to find them on the internet, and you'll only find them on the higher echelons of historical writings. It's not common knowledge. People don't spread this information around. They don't want people to know this. But it's rather spooky. It is an effective tactic, and it is no surprise to me that they tried this maneuver. That's one aspect. Another thing is with pine beetles, this is swerving a little bit off of the First Nation thing, but with pine needles destroying forests like at the rate they are, it is the hope that winter will get cold enough to kill these pine beetles and the trees will remain relatively okay. The thing is, it hasn't gotten cold enough in the last few years to really bump off the pine beetles. But another way of killing those pine beetles is to burn the forest. We can always regrow them. We have the seeds, we can regrow the forest. It may take 50 years for them to be back to where they were, but that would eliminate the pine beetle. It's a concept that's being debated amongst people who study trees. I forget what they're called, forestry and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, if we can get rid of the pine beetle, we'll be a lot better off. And supposedly it was brought in by, it was an Asian type of beetle, and it was most certainly brought in by Asians. And then they pulled the, oh, I don't know how it got their routine afterwards. So we know they did it, but they'll never admit to it. So we're kind of in a quagmire here. So there's many things about trees that are fascinating throughout history. I'm telling you this because I think spooky trees like this should be told the way they are. That although nice, Canada has some of the most beautiful forests in the world, nice greenery, you got pleasant little animals, little squirrels, rabbits, you name it, little cute things. But there are also spooky forests with, you know, thousands of year old trees that look their age. I brought up a number of topics here. Some of them might be not entirely accurate. I may have exaggerated a little bit, but if you think of it from a pathological point of view, a logical point of view, it would make sense that these sort of things sort of happen. And also another thing about trees and why they're spooky is because throughout the Middle Ages, in medieval times, particularly in Europe, scary persons lived within these forests. Mostly witches, warlocks, goblins, you name it. They lived in the forest and they practiced black magic. So it is kind of spooky, and it's the trees. They were alive. They were spooky, and it's almost like they moved, like that they were like the ones in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, when Snow White had to go through this forest. And it was all spooky trees and things like that. In my opinion, it's just upkeep. I mean, you gotta have your spooky forests, but not everyone should be allowed to go in them. And you most certainly cannot have Blair Witch type cultists in these forests. I mean, they gotta be found and rooted out. I believe the anniversary of the movie that came out, or the event, I forget which, is coming up. Or it has already happened, I don't know. But it was like the 20th anniversary, something like that. But I ain't got no respect for, you know, stupid cultists out in the forest who knows what they get up to, but they're screwed up in the head. Got something wrong with them. They're just, you know... I believe in telling things like it is, but I ain't into any of that creepy kind of nonsense. I just want to express an opinion, a personal idea in my head that how things could possibly be. I could be wrong. If someone of intellectual background could deny and discredit my theory and prove it with evidence, then I'm willing to accept that. But as is, there's some things that, if you think of it from a different light, a different point of view, they start to make sense. And I don't think there is going to be anyone who's going to try and deny my claims. At least nobody who has an educational background. Someone who studied history. We'll see though. Prove me wrong. That's all I ask. So, this is my friend Treebeard. I think he looks cool. Kind of reminds me of the Treebeard from the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings, which was made in '78, I believe. In my opinion, is just as good as the Peter Jackson version of Lord of the Rings. The Ralph Bakshi obviously did not have the budget that Peter Jackson had, and Peter Jackson was trying to make it more children orientated, whereas opposed to Ralph Bakshi, who had a more dark, sinister version of Lord of the Rings. Both versions are totally worth watching. I believe Futurama made a joke about chopping up the Treebeard of the Ralph Bakshi version, and to be honest with you, if I saw a tree like that, yeah, I would chop it up for firewood, because you couldn't trust it. It might be an exaggeration that these trees gobbled people up, but the forest most certainly did throughout history through various means. You get lost, disoriented, you can't find water, you die of thirst, some wolves get you, a wild boar gets you, a bear gets you, trees fall on you. There's so many creepy things in the forest. Black widow spiders and rattlesnakes and all kinds of things. So when you think of trees and you think of how evil it is that we clear-cut lumber forests, just think, there are many benefits to cutting up trees. We can build houses with them, we can do this with them, we can do that with them. Obviously, some people have taken it too far and it's all about the money and profit for them, so they're only interested in profits, so therefore they will cut down entire trees unnecessarily. I don't agree with that, but we do need lumber, and some trees have to go. And yes, there are many forests in this world that are spooky, and spooky for different reasons. I don't want to get into the Amazon spooky forest because they're spooky in their own way. I don't have much first-hand experience with the Amazonian forests. I watched a little bit of Man vs. Wild and him trekking through them, and he did paint them in kind of a good light. There are many medicinal benefits to forests. Well, for one thing, there are berries. You can make aspirin out of, somehow you can do that. I don't know, I forget how. In the Amazon, there was one called Dragon's Blood or Red Dragon or something like that, where you just cut it and this red sap comes out, and you can rub it and it's an antiseptic. Learned that from Bear Grylls. Very interesting topic. I wouldn't suggest young people watch Man vs. Wild, but when you get a little bit older, a little bit more responsible, you can learn a lot about nature through watching his programming. Yeah, as you can see, I have Hobgoblin beers because there were Hobgoblin type fanciful creatures, fairies as they call them, in Irish and Scottish folklore that lived within forests. Some of them were malevolent and some of them were kind. It all really depends. But I suggest when you think of trees, don't have just the narrow-minded, oh, they're green, they're beautiful, they're little deer and bunnies and butterflies and all this other stuff, and it's inhumane that humans cut them down because they provide oxygen for people and all these things in consideration. You know, you start to think that it's a bad idea to cut down trees, but we need them. We need their lumber. We need them to build things. So, yeah, sometimes nature isn't right. Sometimes nature is out to get us. Les Stroud would say it's neither for us or against us, but I don't believe in that at all. It really is man versus wild. There's been many cases where man has struggled because the wilds are trying to kill us. And we've had to adapt, evolve, and learn from these experiences. So before you demonize people who chop down trees, just think of it from a different perspective. Anyway, that was the gist of what I wanted to say. Yeah, so Treebeard, well, I guess this is Treebeard's evil cousin, because Treebeard from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings was quite a likable character. Quite trustworthy and honest, whereas the Ralph Bakshi version looked kind of evil, and like it would gobble you up or something. So yeah, anyway, gonna taper this video off. I just bought a couple kegs of Hobgoblin draft beer. That should go down a real treat. Yeah, talk to you guys later. See ya.